The Paul Leslie Interviews.
I've been hosting this show for 13 and a half years, and this is the first mayor or the first of any kind of government official I've ever had.
Oh, really? Okay.
Indeed. So thank you for being that man.
Oh, you're welcome. It's a pleasure.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, I want to introduce you to this man. If you don't know him already, he's a jazz musician, but you might know him as the mayor of Charleston, the very beautiful, historic, scenic city in South Carolina. Thank you for making the time to do this.
Well, Paul, it's a pleasure to be with you, and jazz is a passion of mine, so one of my favorite topics to talk about.
Well, I want you to take us back a little bit.
Yeah.
What would a typical day in the Tecklenburg household look like?
Well, I'm not sure that this would be an everyday occurrence, but I just have these memories of, as a young child, my grandmother was a piano teacher, and she played the piano so beautifully and so well, in addition to teaching. And whenever the family would gather around for any kind of family occasion and there was a piano, as long as there was a little shot of bourbon on the rocks over on the right side of the piano, my grandmother would be sitting there just playing her heart out. and whenever there were older folks around, aunts and uncles and friends, they would just, and having a family or gathering or a party, everyone would be singing while she played. And she played she could read music, obviously, because she was a teacher, but she played so well by ear, so you could just say, "Miss Teck, do you know such and such a song?" And if she didn't, if you just hum a couple of bars of it, she'd be rollicking and rolling with it. She had a stride piano sound like Errol Gardner. And she was really a terrific piano player. So that's one of my early memories growing up and being around. And so definitely it was an influence on my love of music.
And how did you get pointed in the direction of jazz? What was it about it that got you?
Well, I played the piano, from grammar school, and I don't know that I had great exposure to mainstream jazz growing up in South Carolina at the time, and my parents really didn't listen to that style of music. I studied a good bit of Gershwin when I was in high school, and that certainly got me going in the right direction. But it really wasn't until I was in college that meeting some friends in Georgetown University and in Washington, D.C., friends at college and being able to go to jazz clubs there in D.C. that I really started taking a real passion to jazz. And but probably the biggest single event was I was blessed to have saved up some money working after my freshman year in college, and after sophomore year, I'd saved this money, and I went to Europe for about 10 weeks, and I ran into this guy, and he was going, I'd never heard of it, he was going to the Montreux Jazz Festival, and I said, well, gee, that sounds interesting. Do you mind if I tag along with you? And I did, and for 2 weeks, it was literally the finest jazz musicians, mostly Americans, who were over there with Pablo Records that summer, and it was just like a total indoctrination and education of American and jazz idiom during that 2 weeks. It just totally turned me on.
Who would you say your favorite piano players are?
Well, that'd be a pretty long list because I'm a fan of many. Bill Evans is clearly right up there at the top, if not my favorite of all times. He's so introspective and capable and thoughtful. I really enjoy his playing a lot. Kenny Barron, I'm a big fan of. Keith Jarrett, Hank Jones, I saw here in Charleston one time, and I love his playing. Oscar Peterson, I've seen. In fact, he was at that festival in Switzerland that I mentioned. During college age, I was a big fan of Chick Corea's and Herbie Hancock's. And then later, when I started studying earlier jazz because of my great uncle's career, I started listening, to Fats Waller and Errol Garner and folks from the 20s and 30s that many people probably would have never heard of, like Art Schutt and Irvin Brodsky and folks like that. But anyway, the list could go on.
Would it be possible for you to pick a favorite jazz record?
That's a difficult one because I've got a number of favorites and folks that I like so much. I tell you, I'm a big fan of Dexter Gordon's, and I can't say it's all on one album, but Rahsaan Roland Kirk I'm a big fan of his, and as I mentioned, Bill Evans. I guess one of my favorites is this duet. There were two duet albums that Bill did with Tony Bennett. That they're just remarkable recordings.
You were incredibly hip. You mentioned this festival that you went to.
Yeah.
What was the best concert you attended, regardless of genre?
Well, during that festival, this might surprise people because it included everybody from Dizzy Gillespie to even Bill Evans, who I just mentioned I'm such a big fan of, and Oscar and Roy Eldridge and Clark Terry and just all these luminaries of jazz. But the most exciting, spiritual, just kind of blow your mind player and performance was that of Rahsaan Roland Kirk. He was really incredible.
I think it's very interesting about your experience at the Berkeley College of Music. Was moving to Boston an adjustment for you?
Well, not too bad. I had been in Washington for college for 4 years before I went to Berkeley in Boston, and I knew some folks there. My girlfriend at the time was actually from a suburb of Boston, and my grandmother had family up there. So no, it wasn't. It was fine other than the cold weather. It was the spring of '78. They had this huge blizzard, and that's part of what drove me home.
What was the most fascinating or the most interesting thing you learned at Berkeley?
Well, I was intimidated, let me say that first, by the level of musicianship of the kids there. And I, as I mentioned, had already graduated from college, so the average student was a little younger than me, and they were all monsters playing-wise. So I had to learn something about myself in all of that and how much I needed to practice and play. I was very interested in learning theory and the harmonics and, learning to use chromaticism and whole tone scales and things like that and where it's appropriate. So I enjoyed that end of it and found that to be very fascinating.
We're talking with Mayor John Tecklenburg. We just did an interview with Mike Veck of the Charleston River Dogs baseball team, and he said Charleston is becoming a music town. Do you agree?
Well, yeah, I do agree with that. And the number of venues for live music has grown considerably. When I moved back to Charleston in '83, within just a few weeks, I started playing with Mike Gennaro out at Gennaro's restaurant. They used to be out on Savannah Highway, and I played with Mike for over 30 years. And back then, there were just a few places in town where you might find a live band. Yeah, it's definitely grown, and I think we're thankful to the music programs at the College of Charleston. They have an excellent jazz program. Quentin Baxter and many other fine musicians have come out of there, and now there's a music program that Mark Sturbank runs up at Charleston Southern University. So all of this has, in fact, added to Charleston, quote, becoming a music town. I agree. It's great. Let's keep it going.
In addition to music, there have been some fine literary contributions Charleston has made to the world. Did you ever meet the author Pat Conroy?
I did. I knew Pat. I met him in the early 90s, to tell you the truth, involved with politics. He was a supporter of Senator Hollings, who I helped in a campaign or two, and of our former mayor, Joe Riley, when Joe ran for governor back in '94, and Pat had fundraisers for both of those gentlemen when they were running, and I was involved in setting up the events and getting to know Pat. And he's a friend of my dear friend, the mayor of Beaufort, Mayor Kaiserling down there, was a childhood friend of Pat's. Pat, grew up in the Beaufort area. So I was blessed to have known Pat. He was an amazing individual.
Different places have different ideas that people have about the people who live there. In the course of doing this show, I've noticed that people from New York really, really like to talk. It's almost a given. What would you say defines the people of Charleston, their commonality?
Well, hospitality comes to mind. We're very hospitable people, and we generally are gracious and kind and helpful and caring about our neighbors and even strangers and people that come to visit. So I think that's one of our trademarks.
And if someone was to visit Charleston and they could only have one day here, what would you suggest that they do?
One day here, I would just, I think, advise them not even to take a tour, an official tour or anything, but just get out and walk around the city. It's a very walkable place, and you see how human of a scale we have, but you feel the heritage, the history, the architecture, the people by getting out and walking around the city. That would be my one-day recommendation.
Now, for the most controversial question I have, it's about food.
Yeah.
There's some great, great food in Charleston. If you had to leave Charleston for some reason, where would you have your last meal?
Well, I'm hoping I have my last meal down at Edisto. It's like a second home for me. My grandmother on my mother's side, not the piano-playing grandmother, but my other grandmother had a home at Edisto, and we would spend summers down there, and it became like a second home to me. So I'm hoping my last meal's down there.
What's something about you that people don't know?
Well, now that I'm somewhat of a public figure, I guess I'm not sure that there's anything left that they don't know about me. But I guess everybody knows that I love jazz and music. And the one thing I didn't mention about Boston and what was fascinating that I really uncovered there was, and it began a lifelong journey for me, was to dig into the music and the musical career of my great uncle Fudd Livingston. I'd always heard when I was a kid that he had wrote this song called "I'm Through with Love," but I never really heard much more about his musical career because he kind of unfortunately was somewhat the black sheep of the family and became quite an alcoholic later in life. But his early life was, in fact, filled with an incredibly active music career, playing with the best of the best in the 20s and 30s. So when I was at Berkeley, I went to the card catalog one day. They had a music library where you could listen to recordings, because I was wondering if there was this recording of that song, "I'm Through with Love," that I had heard about, and I found it in the card catalog. But then I kept flipping the cards, and there were more songs that he wrote: "Imagination" and "Feeling No Pain" and "Humpty Dumpty" and "Harlem Twist," and the list went on. And then I started finding out the bands that he played in and the recordings that he made, and it just led to basically a lifelong research project that I've been engaged in to uncover the incredible body of work that my great uncle was involved with in early jazz history.
So you could say that jazz is in your blood.
There you go. I got just a tiny little bit of that gene, but because Fudd and his brother and my grandmother, they were all just incredible musicians.
People from all over listening in, not just Charleston. What do you think maybe people who've never been to Charleston would be surprised about? What's something about Charleston that many people don't know?
Well, this is interesting. One of the center points of our city, for at least for festivals and community events, is Marion Square, right in the midst of town. Most people would not know or guess that the city of Charleston does not own that property, does not own the park. It is owned by two long-standing militia. And in fact, Marion Square is the original parade ground of the Washington Light Infantry and the Sumter Guards, which are two historic militia that are still in business, so to speak, still active, and they own the property. So whenever the city, we have a lease. The city has a lease of the property from the Washington Light Infantry and the Sumter Guard, and but for any major things to occur, or if we need to change anything, we actually have to get the permission of those two organizations.
Interesting. What would you hope people say about you when you're not in the room?
Well, I certainly hope that I will be viewed as someone who's acted with integrity. I always try to call things as I see them and be truthful, and believe you stay out of trouble that way. Whether people agree with you or not, if you take a stand and have some good reason behind why you're doing it and what you believe in, that's important. So I hope I'll be remembered or known for that.
What is the best thing about being John Tecklenburg?
Wow. So right now in my life, in addition to my incredible wife and family love and support that I have, serving as mayor of this incredible city is just a one-in-a-lifetime opportunity, and I'm so honored to be of service. And I love the job. I mean, I feel like I was trained to do this, and that I'm where I'm supposed to be. So it's just the best thing. Thank you.
My last question. For anyone who's listening to this interview, whether they're in Charleston, just regardless of where they might be, an open forum, what would you say in closing?
Well, in closing, I would just repeat the lesson that our community learned and hopefully relearned after the tragedy almost 2 years ago at Emmanuel AME Church, and that is that love is stronger than hate. And so if we can all in our lives, I know it just sounds corny or old-fashioned, but if we can love each other and respect each other, whether you agree or not, be mindful of other people's needs and wishes, and be respectful and love one another. Wow, boy, would this world be a better place. I continue to see events around the world similar to what happened here a couple of years ago in London just the night before last, with folks being killed, and it just breaks my heart. And so the need is still there for us all to share that message that love is stronger than hate. Let's try to live that.
Mayor, thank you so much for this opportunity.
Wow, Paul, it's been a real pleasure. Probably talk too much about me, but I love talking about the music and the jazz, and I hope when I get off the phone you'll play a song of my Uncle Fudd's.
Absolutely.
All right. Thank you so much, Paul. Take care.
You too, sir. Thank you.